in the world of coaching and or interviewing, summarizing what you've heard is always a good way of confirming understanding. Right? So it's a good thing to do whether you are coaching a client, just to understand what you've heard, it's landed correctly, so you know how to probe the next question. There's also something, you mentioned the word silence there. There's something called the silence method, which literally is, in the coaching world, as simple as embracing the silence. Asking a question and being uncomfortable with the silence and listening, which isn't just about what we hear, it's about what we can see as well, as how what we interpret in front of us from body language and what signs are we receiving, which go beyond sometimes just the words that we hear.
Good evening, Nick.
I'm good, mate. I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. I'm just so joyful that the sun is out, and not only is the sun out, it feels quite warm. It's a bit cooler today than it was yesterday, but yesterday was proper t-shirt weather. 31st of March yesterday, today obviously being the 1st of April when we record this, and spring is finally here, at least in Brighton where I am, and it's just so nice to just walk along the beach, look at the sea. There's something so therapeutic about it, which, I think I know there's a couple of things which are therapeutic about the sea, one being negative ions. But anyway, how are you doing?
Well, I'm frowning there because I've suddenly wondered if I spent the whole day with the wrong date. Isn't it the 31st of March today, not the 1st of April?
You're right. It is the 31st of March.
I wasn't sure if I was going mad. Or maybe that's your early April Fools.
Do you know what?
You got the date wrong.
Do you know what? Yesterday, I thought I was going mad because not obviously, but for those listeners that aren't aware, in the UK on Saturday night, the clocks leapt forward an hour. And what really confused me is my watch and my phone, I think, do it automatically. When I kind of checked in the morning, I thought, okay, yeah, that feels right or whatever, because it does it automatically, even though when they're in airplane mode. And then I was at the beach and I was on the phone and I looked at my watch and it said 4 o'clock. And I looked at my phone and it said 5 o'clock. And I was thinking, what the hell's going on? And I was like, which one is right? Which one's right? And I had no idea what time it was because obviously we'd leapt forward an hour. But actually what happened, and I worked it out the following day, is I think my phone was picking up France time.
Okay.
Because we're right on the coast. And in certain points along the beach, it picks up an hour ahead, which is France. So someday I thought I'd leapt forward 2 hours. And I go, oh my God, it's so light at like 8 o'clock at night or whatever it was.
Well, I had no idea the clocks had gone forward. I had some presentations to write, which I started about 11 o'clock on Saturday. And I finished at 3 a.m. And I was really confused. It was obviously a long old session, family gone to bed. And I was like, for 1 minute it was midnight, next thing I know it was 3. I hadn't realised it had gone forward. I just thought I'd been head down and lost the time. Went to bed obviously at 3 a.m. A bit knackered in the morning, had to be up early for Leo's football. And I was like, God, I was working way later than I thought. And my wife reminded me that the clocks. I mean, it was still too late to be working on a Saturday. Let's be fair, early. But yeah. I got an hour of it was a time that just disappeared without my knowledge, which caught me slightly off guard. But yeah, we've got April 1st tomorrow, mate. I don't know if you're doing anything for April Fools, but
no, I don't think so. But I mean, speaking of the time change, I decided this morning to get up 6 o'clock and get to a hot yoga class at 7 in Brighton, so about 15-minute cycle. Boy, it is hard that hour, because my body clock, I think I mentioned it before, is so precise that I know that by the minute, when I wake up naturally and bowel movements and all of that, and just that 1 hour time change has shifted everything, because it was really like 5 a.m. for my body. And it was really difficult to get up. And it just reminded me, I think, have you read that book by Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep? I think you have.
No.
Oh, you're not? I'm sure many listeners have read it or heard of it. He did a big podcast run on it maybe 5 years ago. And it's good in terms of the research, and he promoted a lot of visibility when it came to sleep. And I think he can be credited with some of that. It doesn't have so much what I would like to consider tips in there that are going to help people. But one of the things that you might already be aware of that really I thought was of interest. And I've always hated the hour time change that we do, British summer time to Greenwich Mean Time or daylight saving in some countries. And he says that it's notable in terms of the hospital admissions on heart attacks. When the clocks go forward, there's a spike on the Monday morning. And when they go back, there's a dip. And I can really believe that, because your body's just not ready for it. And if you're already like a little bit on the way there, I can see how that time shift can really, really throw things off. It's really interesting to see that.
I mean, as you know, I've suffered with insomnia. I don't really suffer anymore, which is good, got it under control with various things that we do. But I remember when I used to run an insomnia website with advice and guidance for others. And one of those was, and it sounds counterintuitive, one of the advices I would give to people is, look, we tend to press the snooze button and give ourselves more time in bed, but sometimes actually making your sleep shorter, moving it to earlier in your time can actually make you wake up feeling much more refreshed. Because often, as you said, you know your clock and internal circadian rhythms probably really, really well, but actually you want to be waking up in the right state. You don't want to be in deep sleep when your alarm goes, or you're going to feel really, really groggy. So you can try and time it, and actually moving your alarm clock 15 minutes either way, later or earlier, you'll find actually it's not just 15 minutes. Potentially you'll start changing it between sleep cycles and you'll notice a huge difference. So for some people, waking up at 5, well, actually they'll feel way more energized than maybe they would if they woke up at 6 or even 7. Sometimes worth it playing around with.
I must admit, the alarm went off I think I looked at the time, it was like 5 to 6, and an alarm went off at 6, and I did turn it off. I'd already set an alarm for 6:15, and I was kind of dozing, and at that point I was thinking, shall I bother with the yoga? Does my body need more rest? And I recognised the whole time.
Devil on your shoulder.
But then I thought, you know what, even if I stayed in bed, I'm not going to sleep properly anyway now. So I got up, and I'm glad I did, and it should hopefully shift me to going to bed again at reasonable times. Rather than, and it's actually a good point. It's worth having a couple of days of pain and just getting up at the same time or going to bed to readjust yourself. If you always stagger it, it takes ages to catch up.
I've been under the weather. I don't get ill that often. I know you don't either. But I think a lot of it is down to the fact I had these presentations. I've been going to bed really late. Immune system slightly suppressed. A 3 a.m. finish with a 6 o'clock wake up on a Saturday is not an ideal of a Saturday, catch up. And I've ended up with a bit of a cold, feeling a little bit run down. You can see the bags under my eyes, which are always there because it's a kind of a trait that we have, but a little bit more pronounced, and I'm looking a little bit worse for wear today. But it does have an impact. I think the lack of sleep has just knocked my immune system a little bit. So I'm trying to recover.
I think I mentioned it. I think I reposted from our Instagram account, which if you're not following, everyone listening, we're at mindful_paths_podcast, and we posted around sleep, and I think I mentioned in that post that it's got to be the number one biohack out there. So lots of people are talking about biohacking with supplements and light therapies, and I do like light therapies, by the way. But the number one, in my opinion, I know another expert on breath, he was talking about breathing being the number one biohack, and that is a great biohack. I just feel that actually sleep is probably number one, because for me, if I'm not sleeping well, I'm less likely to do the breathing work. Now, I know that the breathing can also get you that energy and can get you that shot of coffee, quote unquote, if you didn't sleep well, and it is good. But I think ultimately, long term, the biohack is
lack of sleep can kill motivation, right? This is what stops us from getting up and going for that morning run because we've had a late night. And I'm talking to someone who has very little sleep comparatively to most. I mean, Lucy, as you know, my wife gets 8-9 hours most nights. I live on between 5 and 6.
Really? I mean,
Have a look, actually. Let me see what my stats are. I'll go on to Garmin to track it.
I think 7.5 according to my Oura ring, but with 8.25 hours in bed. And big shout out to Oura, actually, because they've sorted me out with a new ring. Did
a good job, didn't they? Yeah, I was well impressed with their attention to customer service. You should tell the listeners.
I didn't speak to anyone, actually. So what happened, listeners, is I noticed last week or a couple of weeks ago that my battery on my Oura seemed to be dying, and then it's just gone kaput. And I had it on the charger, I believe. I logged into my account online. I ended up having a virtual conversation with a AI chatbot who somehow was able to check the ring without much detail input from me, recognize it was a battery issue, and they automatically had my address on file. They said, is this the address? Is this the size ring that you want and that you've got? And it's on its way. It should be here tomorrow, albeit in the London place.
But I wouldn't want to compare my sleep scores with yours. Would you like a bit of data here? I mean, to be fair, I get more sleep than I'd actually anticipated. So I've gone into my my negative bias there with the 5 to 6 hours. I've gone over the last year. It is short over the last week or two, which is I didn't no point using that because of my presentation knocks it out. But for the last year's worth of collected data, I average 6 hours and 36 minutes as my average. So 36 minutes longer than I would have anticipated. So that's quite good. My average sleep score is 75. I imagine yours is a little bit higher than that, but I don't need as much. Yeah. Well, let me correct this. Actually, I say I don't need as much. I can function much better doing day-to-day cognitive tasks, I would say, and I can keep my motivation much higher on a significantly less sleep than my wife would need. However, I think it was you. I'm pretty sure it was you at the end. We finished our last episode. I think we went offline and carried on the conversation, and I said to you, we've had these conversations, but often I struggle with memory. Was it you told me about the memory, or was it somebody else?
I'm not sure.
Maybe someone else. Anyway, so someone said to me, yeah, wait, I remember. Yeah, there you go. Someone said to me, Nick, it might be that your memory for things that happened years ago, because my siblings remember everything. I just wonder if it's because I've suffered from insomnia for so long, particularly when I was younger, where I was averaging, real insomnia, going 4, 5, 6 nights without any sleep whatsoever. I've obviously been medicated, and I'm back into a good space now. But I wonder if that's why I don't remember anything like my siblings do. I wonder if actually it's not that I have a bad memory. It's because sleep never gave me the opportunity to compartmentalize and to categorize it. Really? And it's there somewhere, but I can't access it like everyone else. It's like it hasn't been catalogued. And that was quite enlightening. I was like, I'm sure it was yourself, but someone said it to me about a week ago. And it was like, you know what? As someone who's studied sleep to quite a lot of detail, I've given advice on it. I've never self-reflected on its impact. I wonder if that's why I don't remember everything like everyone else does. Just that period of time in my life, which lasted about 15 years, I just wasn't sleeping like the ordinary humans would do when I was medicated. I wonder if that's why I don't remember a lot.
I believe that to be the case. I think we were having that conversation, and sleep is essential for memory and cognition and function, everything. It's just basically everything. So if you're not sleeping well, it's probably going to prioritize other things to keep you alive, and maybe your memory isn't so important. And so, it's only got so much time that it can allocate to rebuilding you, and memory may have taken a back seat. So I can wholeheartedly agree with that.
Although my memory has kicked in. It wasn't you. I'll hold that out. But it was one of our listeners that told me. It was his partner, listens, Sarah. But Ben, a good friend of mine, came to visit, and it was him that mentioned it. We lived quite close together when I was going through the worst of my insomnia. And he was saying that'll be why, because there's lots of things we did together that I just don't remember, and he does. And he said, Nick, you just weren't sleeping at the time.
You talking about it with him, maybe that might have been it. I think
possibly. I remember that. I think I may have mentioned it on this show before, but the idea when at a dinner party, I was saying one of the things I wish I'd done when I lived in London was go and see One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest when Christian Slater was in it, and my wife turned around and went, "I took you." And I was like, I had no recollection. It was very embarrassing. But
I think I mentioned at the time when we talked about this that you'll be happy to hear that I also have no recollection of going to see The Lion King, and my mum. Bringing this up because she came with me and some of her friends, and like I say, I've got what I wouldn't consider I've got a photographic memory or anything like that, but I've got such a good memory for pretty much everything over probably since the age of about 10 from before 10 not so much, where I can almost without closing my eyes visualize exactly where people were and what they were doing and what they were wearing or whatever in many key areas. The Lion King, I can't for the life of me create a vision of me having gone to see that. So there we go.
It happens
to everyone. But
I proposed to my wife after watching The Lion King. There you go. Has good feelings for me. So,
and if you've forgotten that one, then that would have been more disastrous.
Fair enough. I did a podcast on the HR show that I run earlier today, and it was all about emotional intelligence with a guy called Dr. Robin Hill. Really interesting conversation. And I said, if emotional intelligence was a movie, a song, or a book, what would it be? And he said it'd be The Lion King. And he said there's a scene in there. I don't know which one exactly it was, but I think it's Rafiki is talking. Is that the baboon or the monkey? I think it's.
I don't remember.
And he was talking about how you need to look at life, and he gives you life lessons. And he talks through the show, and he said if it could be anything, it would be The Lion King for the things he says. And he says there's a line in there where it says the past can hurt, but the way I see it, you can run from it or learn from it. And he said, you got to go and look at that scene. It's a great lesson on emotional intelligence. So,
the last time I saw The Lion King was the recent remake, but I saw it in Croatian, I believe, with possibly subtitles. I
saw Mufasa. That was just basically a story of a really long walk. It was very dull by comparison, which was disappointing because the guy that wrote and directed Hamilton, which I love, the musical, the best musical probably ever made. I'm pretty sure it's the same person.
Well, the Louis, what's his name? Something. think.
We're talking about memory now. I'm not going to remember the names again.
I can never remember his name, but the guy who wrote Hamilton, and
I'll have a look. I love that musical, so good. But the
I haven't
Mufasa was not on the same level, I have to say. Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yeah, that's the one. Lin-Manuel. Yeah, he's not working with necessarily original characters, potentially, so there's some constraints there, I would say. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, going back to sleep, super important. Number one biohack, and the reason why I decided not to join my family out in LA when they went there, because I can't handle more time zone changes right now. I need to settle into UK time. So,
I thought something that might be interesting to discuss, because we were talking offline earlier as well about your mum cutting you. Was it your mum cutting you off? Well, and the idea of, because you and I both work as coaches, I think you're starting with your kids again and the coaching you do. And obviously I work as an executive coach. And one of the first things you learn when you coach is to speak less, listen more. We've got 2 ears, 1 mouth, and that means we can listen twice as much as we speak. And certainly in terms of coaching, it's about asking questions and really actively listening to the responses. But I thought it might be quite interesting to bring some of that coaching kind of approach to the conversation, because you were talking about your mum earlier, and I know both of us we can be quite opinionated, Harry. I think it's fair. That's why we run this show. We have a debate. We talk quite a lot, and sometimes we can both. Often we could take our own advice a little bit more. They say we often teach the things we most need to learn, right? And I thought it might be an interesting point of conversation.
Yeah, I think firstly, we often do teach what we need to learn, and that's another reason why I stepped into quote unquote teaching maybe 15 years ago, because I wanted to remember ideally the concepts I was learning, and the best way to remember it is to teach it. And also when you're learning those concepts, if you're learning them just for you, they tend not to stick as much as if you learn in them knowing you have the intention of teaching them. You tend to remember a lot more. And I was at the beach having a walk, and to be fair, I was getting a little bit frustrated because the signal, for some reason, I think hers was fine because she was on a Wi-Fi at the apartment, but mine, although it was showing a full bar, I think maybe with the sea and other people, whatever, it wasn't very good. So I hung up and I went to a place which had Wi-Fi, and then we re-engaged with the conversation. But occasionally she does have a habit of, when I'm speaking, jump in to give her opinion about the thing before I've actually fully finished the sentence. And often...
listening with the intent to reply, I think is what they call it.
Yeah, and often I will be getting to the point that she's raising anyway towards the latter part of that sentence, and I might say, look, you need to stop interrupting me, or I'm going to not carry on this conversation if I can't actually say what I want to say. And yeah, I think it's important, because I think not only do we stop listening when we start speaking, we also stop listening when we start internalizing our own dialogue, preparing what we want to say to respond, or maybe thinking about why that person is wrong or why we have a different approach. And I often say to people doing interviews, and you're an expert in probably giving advice to people taking interviews, and maybe you'll agree, maybe you have a different tact, is maybe when you are asked a question, you don't answer it straight away. And we have the thing in one of the public speaking workshops I do about how to answer impromptu questions. And we have a little system that we give them. But before I say answering at all, you can pause for time or stall for time, and you can ask for clarification of the question, or you can say, let me just see if I've understood that question correctly. You've asked me, and you repeat it back in slightly different words to show you've actually really understood it. But what it's given you is time to respond, as opposed to
Sure.
jumping in and just answering the question, because otherwise it shows, at least to me, that you haven't really reflected if you've got a canned answer, or if you've got a jump in and response. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, in the world of coaching and or interviewing, summarizing what you've heard is always a good way of confirming understanding, right? So it's a good thing to do, whether you are coaching a client, just to understand what you've heard, it's landed correctly, so you know how to probe the next question. Or indeed, if you're an interviewee, then it's good to summarize, to understand, and to confirm that you are answering the question as it's set out to be. But I think there's also something, you mentioned the word silence there. There's something called the silence method, which literally is, in the coaching world, as simple as embracing the silence. Asking a question and being uncomfortable with the silence, and listening, which isn't just about what we hear, it's about what we can see as well, as how what we interpret in front of us from body language, and what signs are we receiving which go beyond sometimes just the words that we hear. Body language, as you know, you can read in a very, very different way as well. And I think there's a lot to that. There's many levels of listening that we can go into. There's internal listening, which you mentioned as well, which is very much focused on the self. You're really thinking about what it is we want to say next, that intent to reply, focused on our own thoughts, our own reactions, our own judgments. Then you've got the focused listening, which is really focusing on the other, focusing on you, giving you my full attention. And I think that's important as level 2, because this show is about mindfulness anyway, and mindful paths. And mindfulness is often about being in the present. And that means not being in our own head and trying to be in the, where we're going to go next in the future, or not thinking about what we had for dinner yesterday. It's being really present with you right now and listening to what you've just said, so that I can understand your perspective, I can understand your message. And then I can do that through the summary you've mentioned to make sure I've got that correct. Then, of course, there's the almost global listening, which is on context. It's the highest level where you're receptive to everything. That's the body language, the environment, the emotions, the non-verbal cues. I'll tell you what inspired this conversation today. And again, it goes back to the conversation I had earlier today with the Dr. Robin Hills on emotional intelligence. And he said something to me, which I hadn't really considered before. And my niece, Elise, does some brilliant work on YouTube. I think we talked about her before. She sign languages popular music for people that are deaf, and she brings it to life, and she dances. It's just some wonderful work. And Dr. Robin Hill said to me, he said, Nick, one way you can see where AI won't be able to replicate humans, I think they can replicate everything, try and get them to sign language in the way that humans do. Because we have these muscles, but it's not just about muscles. It's about the nuance, about understanding the space, bringing certain facial elements to the conversation, the way we move our hands, the way we contextualize. It's more than just understanding how to create a sign. It's way bigger than that. And he said, I'll challenge any AI to be able to replicate a very skilled sign language individual who are able to, I don't know, sign linguist, I don't know what the plural would be, but those individuals that can do sign language so powerfully and so creatively and so wonderfully. And I thought that was a really interesting thing as well, because it highlighted the power of being able to really tune in and listen and be present. And I think it had never occurred to me to think of it in that way before, but it just got my little, the neurons firing to think, maybe we'll talk a little bit about speaking and listening.
That might be the second job that AI can't take over. I remember reading one of, I think it was either 21 questions for the 21st century, that Yuval Harari guy, the one that wrote Sapiens.
Yeah.
And he talked about how AI wouldn't take over probably archaeology. I think that was the only profession, but maybe sign language is another. I wanted to say, actually, I was listening as you were talking about silence and signs, and I thought, and I'm sure you've considered this before, but I hadn't until a few years ago, but how silent and listen are an acronym. Oh, not an acronym, anagram of each other.
I'm only aware through you, so I'll give you the credit. We've discussed it before. I think one of our earliest shows, I've never heard it before, so I actually discovered it through the recordings of these audios, but go right back to the third or fourth show. I think you mentioned it then.
But then I was thinking, because I've often thought about other anagrams, and this is how my mind goes, like God and dog, which I thought, man, friend. I thought that was quite interesting. Then I've got devil and lived. And I thought, I wonder what that's all about, or live and evil. I don't know. I'm not sure where I'm going.
I think you're demonstrating an example of listening and watching your mind wander at the same time to these other places, but they're within context.
I do think about words and I can't remember what the correct terminology is for the history or the root of words, maybe etymology of words. Because, for example, and I'm sure I've talked about it before, we talk about breath work, breathe in all the time, and the word spirit or spiritus is breath in Latin. And so when we talk about how we're all connected by spirit, or maybe we're all one, because we're all breathing the same air. We're breathing in, every time we take a breath, we're breathing in atoms that were once in Marilyn Monroe and JFK and people like that. And so I'm always curious about things like that. Decision, décider, means to cut off from any other possibility. When you decide, you cut off from any other possibility and you take the route that you've decided. Courage, right, with the heart, right, means, it doesn't mean you're brave as such, but you've got passion and you go for things. So I just find them really interesting, the kind of root of words, because sometimes the solutions or the answers to what we're looking for are there in plain sight because they're in the words.
I think they're often in plain sight, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you something as a visual to add to your words, and I've mentioned this before, but it's one of my favorite things. I don't know where I got it from. I've used it so many times, particularly in group coaching, which is consider, are you an elephant or a hippo? Are you an animal with huge ears and a tiny mouth, or a huge mouth and tiny ears? It's kind of a really non-offensive way of thinking. And I think everyone can be either or, though they're interchangeable, right? Sometimes we're elephants, sometimes we're hippos. It's a way of kind of not wanting to offend anyone in the room, but that visual, I think, is quite powerful. Are you right now, you're being an elephant or you're being a hippo? And it's, are you really tuned in and listening, or are you just using that big mouth of yours to kind of chew everything in its wake? I think it's quite interesting. But I think from a mindfulness perspective, here's where it gets more complex, is when sometimes we only really associate listening when there's two people in a conversation. So I'm speaking to you now, we've got our listeners are tuning in. But when we're alone with our thoughts, that's why I think it's interesting, where we choose the thoughts we want to hear. We choose the thoughts we want to listen to. We often reject those that don't serve us, or we feel, with our natural negative bias, sometimes we don't want to. You can hear them all day long. Well, you could tell me something. Well, I can choose to ignore, and you can hear it without really hearing it. And you'll probably put it in a better way than I am right now. But the idea that, often we observe our thoughts, but not all of our thoughts deserve our beliefs. Not all of our thoughts are accurate. They trick us, but we sometimes hear the ones we want to hear. And there's an element and a level of listening there that sometimes can serve us really well and can build us up and create champions. And equally, they can break us down as well. And yet often there's no one else involved in that conversation. I
tell you, as you were describing that, and I don't know if this is going to describe it in an easier way, but what jumps into my head is a scene from, I like bringing everything back to movies, as you know, but there was a scene in White Men Can't Jump. Have you seen that with Woody Harrelson?
Finally, you brought up that's a brilliant movie. I'm surprised it's in your repertoire. Usually your movies are terrible.
I watch a lot of movies, so you get
you do.
Back,
it's a great movie. Love that movie.
There's a scene where Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson are in the car, and Wesley Snipes has put some music on. I can't remember who the artist was that he was playing, and maybe Woody Harrelson was either singing along to it or bobbing his head along to it or whatever it was. But Wesley Snipes was making the distinction that Woody Harrelson was just, I think he was like hearing the music, but he wasn't really listening to the music, or
the other way around. Yeah.
I can't remember which way around he put it. And I thought that was really interesting and profound, because a lot of the time, and I do the same, especially when it comes to music. I listen to music, but I'm not really hearing what they're saying. I might even be saying the words along, but I'm not really.
Yeah. I can understand that.
I think it's the same thing. So that, as you were explaining that jumped into my head, because I do think we watch it, we learn a lot from movies. And so we've got things to learn from that, which is great. But I do like that. They did do a remake of it as a TV movie or a series on Disney Plus. Not so good. So
no, I've not seen that. I've not seen that.
I wouldn't watch that one.
But I think it's interesting. There's, as you know, one of my favourite quotes from Michael Neal is every feeling lives in the shadow of a thought. And it's what we decide to give power to. And I think there's an element here of when people are struggling, or they're going through a bad time, or they're feeling stressed, or they're feeling emotional or angry or sad or whatever. It's what thoughts are you listening to in that moment, and what are you closing your mind off to as well? What are the thoughts you're not letting in, or what are the voices or the friends sometimes, the communication, the messages? Because you can have someone telling you you're beautiful every day of the week, but you can choose to hear that message, or you can choose not to in one kind of instance. And sometimes we're selective in our listening.
It's a message I share, I think, every Friday when I teach. When I close my yoga classes, normally I close it, and after we've done everything, and literally the final words I might say, and I invite people, if they want to, come into like the namaste position, the prayer position, and I normally say, bring your hands to your forehead or third eye, give us the wisdom to watch our thoughts, then lower your hands towards your mouth or your throat chakra, and give us the restraint to watch our words, especially when dealing with other people, but also to be mindful and compassionate about our own internal dialogue. And then finally, hands in the heart center, give us the strength and courage to do whatever is right and necessary, even when it's not the most preferred or desired path. And so that middle one is what's reference to what you're talking about. And being mindful of our own internal dialogue, and maybe ignoring it when it needs to be ignored, maybe championing it when it needs to be championed, those sorts of things. So listening to ourselves is super important, right? Listening to your gut instinct, where we talked about the gut before, the gut being the second brain, or maybe the first brain. Has more neurons going into it to the brain than the other way around. So I don't know if people give enough credence to things like our physiology. We're such a brain-orientated, and not just a brain-orientated society, a left brain-orientated society, which is more that logic reasoning side of the brain, that a lot of the other intellect or skills, emotional intellect that you were talking about on an earlier podcast, but musical intellect, physical intellect, all of those things tend to take a second or back seat compared to the left brain intellect, as it were, which, was making me think about that famous Einstein quote, right, where he says, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's going to go its whole life thinking it was stupid. And I think that's what we do with people, is that we judge them based on generic societal expectations of how intelligent they should be or how capable they are at certain things. But actually, not the whole reason, but a reason that I choose to believe we have 8 billion people plus on the planet is because they all offer a different perspective on things. And
it was Sydney Banks that said, which I'm a big fan of, said life is not determined by external circumstances, but by the quality of our thinking. And that's where our ego sits. As well, ego is what we basically how we think of ourselves. It's layered with there, but also, whether we want to be humble or humility is linked to how much we think of ourselves, what we want to let in. I think you're right. It's those pictures that we create and what we're trying to, it's not just what's up in our heads. It's how does our body feel as well. And if we can change the way we think, we can change the way that we feel. If we can change what we want to hear sometimes, and that's the beauty of we're so intelligent as a species that we can be really selective of what we want to let in. It's a bit like you go back to that interview scenario. I could choose to make an assumption that could be completely untrue, which is the interviewer doesn't like me. I didn't, and the interviewer could think, well, maybe they're thinking, he doesn't like me. They're going to think I had a soft handshake if that's important. They're going to did not like my last response. All these thoughts, they can run away with all that negative thinking potentially. On the flip side, you can go into an interview and go, I've nailed this. I did really, really well. They love me. We create these stories for ourselves, and actually either or could be true. They're outside of our control to certain degrees. So we create these narratives, and how much we choose to listen to it. Are we really listening to the feedback that the interviewer is giving us at the moment, or are we creating these stories in our heads at breakneck speed? Because this happens in real time. Like we're talking to you right now going, Harry doesn't like me. Harry's not like that response. At the same time, we're trying to answer the question you've given me. And that's a lot of stuff to deal with in our heads. So sometimes you just have to go back to that kind of silence method of going, actually, let me just take a moment to summarize what you said, just to silence the voices that are telling me it's either going well or it's going badly. I just want to summarize how I feel about what you've asked me, Harry. I'm going to put my best foot forward and give you the response that I think answers your question. Taking that breath in that moment.
Something that this conversation is making me think about is a really good friend of mine, actually. And you were talking about interviews, you were talking about having stories in the head about the interviews, but also you were talking earlier about waiting, to people to stop so that you can then speak, and that may be in bigger situations. And one of my good friends, unfortunately, he had a somewhat of a routine medical before he was due to. He's a doctor, and he was going to do a year or two abroad, I think in Australia, and there was some sort of medical that was needed. And I think they discovered something, turned out to be benign, but as a result of the surgery to go in to remove it, which I think was coming through the throat, they clipped or they did something to one of his vocal cords, and that then led it to basically collapse. And so the situation is now he was always quite a chilled out person, to the point where I remember him going for interviews to get his, I don't know if he shared this necessarily, but he's quite chilled out, quite laid back. I've never really seen him raise his voice anyway, get angry, but you can't really tell whether he's enthusiastic or excited about things a lot of the time. So going into interviews, it's a bit like when you record on a video, you might think you're giving 10 out of 10 energy, but when you see it, you're giving 2 out of 10 energy. And So people were coming across thinking, well, he's not really passionate, not really into it. And this was before this situation happened. Now with the situation that got him clipped, it's changed his life quite significantly because he can't raise his voice, which means he doesn't want to go to bars, clubs. Not that he does now anyway, he's married and got kids, but even like a loud pub, or even in an environment where, let's say, there's 3 or 4 friends going out for dinner, he would probably prefer one-on-one conversations, because in that 3 or 4 people company, everyone's competing for energy, talking over each other, not really stopping and listening. And what I found with him, he's actually become really good. I can't remember what it was like before, but he's really, really good at waiting for someone to finish their sentence properly.
Yeah.
He pauses to make sure they have finished, and then he responds, because he can't compete with that. I mean, it's obviously it's really bad. I feel for him.
Another thought came to mind when he gave the early part of the example. I don't know if any of our listeners watched The Apprentice. For my sins, I haven't watched some of the other series, but I've been watching this one.
The same thing. Are you going to mention about being on camera?
I'll go back with the guy who was doing the shopping channel, who came away going, I nailed it. I was so good. And everyone watching it is going, you were dreadful. You had no energy. You were awful. You like the Hoover fell apart. And he came out going, I did the best I could do. I was really energetic.
Yeah.
And that's just one of those things where you're going, but his experience is created from the inside out, right? His experience, his thought process, his experience is based on the thoughts that he's had. So his experience is created from the inside out. He's coming out going, yeah, I nailed it, because that's where his head is. I had the energy. But we're only ever one thought away from a completely different experience. And it only would take a few people eventually to him to watch it back and say, no, it might change for him. But what's interesting is we're all watching it going, you were absolutely dreadful.
It's funny you mentioned that, because as I was giving this example, and this is where our telepathy probably has married up from where I am and where you are. I was thinking of that example, and I thought I can't deviate to that just yet because I'll go off on a tangent. But I was thinking of that example at that very moment I was explaining the situation with my friend. And what that also reminded me of is my early YouTube videos. Now, if you're not currently subscribed or watching my YouTube videos, it's for the listeners, it's The Thought Gym on YouTube. And if you click by oldest, I think it's oldest. I left all my original videos up there from years ago. There's so much poor energy, because what happens is you don't realize it. I felt like I was giving a lot of energy, and I was giving the same level of energy that I might be having a conversation with someone that I'm passionate about the thing. I felt. But the camera really does zap 90% of the energy that you feel like you're giving. So you have to give 200, 300, 400% of what you think is suitable for it to come across as normal on camera. And I remember what helped me, I'm not sure if I went fully on that, but was recording lots and lots of videos in one go. And I think one weekend, I recorded maybe 26 videos, and I just got into the habit of it, and also really projected myself through the other side of the lens to that person, and recognizing that I'm almost going through quicksand or like a muddy thing where I'm slogging through to get through that lens. And so I had to give way more. So I felt for that guy on The Apprentice, because I feel like you say, his own internal experience was he was giving a lot of energy, but the camera takes 90% of the energy off.
Well,
so
if we bring the thought process back in, I mean, I was watching it thinking, like, I'm sure 99% of the population have watched it, and I wonder if you didn't go on a tangent because you were too embarrassed to say you watched The Apprentice. But let's say we both watched The Apprentice. I'm teasing.
No, not only have I watched
we're all watching it going, we could have done a better job. I was watching it going, I would be perfect for this challenge. I believe I'd be perfect for this challenge. But you're right, you do have to put a lot of energy out. You've got to think quick. You've got to do these things. And I think that's why when I've done, this is what podcast number 2 just for today. These take it out of you. All both finish, and we're having a good job of conversation, and you don't notice it in real time. But sometimes you can finish and go, God, I'm knackered now. I've been staring through a screen, trying to listen, and which is what we're talking about at the moment, and be mindful and get the conversation flowing and hear what you've got to say, and then the next bit and interject to keep the conversation flowing for our listeners. It can be quite exhausting in a good way.
Nick, not only do I watch The Apprentice, I've watched every season of The Apprentice, every episode of every season, and believe it or not, I applied for The Apprentice in season 1, which was now 20 something. I actually went for one of the interviews. I think it was around Tottenham Court Road, if I remember correctly. It must have been around 2004. because I remember I was
Intel.
dating someone, and it was the first season, and I'd heard about it because it was on in America, and there was mass interviews, and I didn't get past the first round where I
went for season 3.
Did you go for season 3?
Yeah, I did.
The guy Tim Campbell, who's the person who's the right hand man or left hand man to Alan Sugar right now on The Apprentice, won that first season. I remember him winning. I think he was from Enfield, so my area. And
was he series 1? Was he? I remember he was working on the tubes, wasn't he? If I got that incorrectly, yeah, I think it was better then. It was much more about business leaders rather than just sort of youngsters and what looks good on TV. The credibility dipped a lot.
They got $100,000 job, but then I think around 2010 they changed it to.
I feel like the credibility of the applicants was significantly better then. But I went for, I think it was series 3 or series 4. I got a call back. I went back. I think I went through about 5 rounds, and then one of the rounds when I went, I don't know if it's changed now, and people watching it might say different. I don't know if you'd classify this as a round, but it was quite brutal. The first when you go in and you had to give a line, and they just went, "Yeah, you 3 stay, you 5 go home," and I was like, "Oh wow, that's brutal for people who come into London. You're there for like 10 minutes." But there was a section where you're all kind of hanging out in the foyer. And there was like a receptionist or an executive assistant or someone who was supporting, sort of hanging around with us, making sure we're okay. And I don't know if it's just me or whatever. I was obviously striking up conversation with everyone I could possibly find and just trying to find, having a good old chit chat. And then they just came in the middle of it and just went, "Yeah, you 4 go home." I think that was out without knowing it. Part of the test was just seeing if you could strike a conversation with the executive assistants that were around, the production crew. And then had to come back. And I ended up getting right down to the 1-to-1 interview stage. And so how long ago would it have been? It would have been 16 years ago, whatever series that was, because I remember saying, I think this worked against me. I may be wrong. Maybe it was just me. You never know because you have these stories you create in your head. But Lucy was pregnant with Eva.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. And I was saying, and they were asking, well, how's it going to be? You're going to have a newborn. We're going to be on the show. It's going to be right in the time where, you're not going to be there. And I was like, no, I've got permission and it's all going to be okay and whatever. But there you are. So obviously I didn't know at that point what it would be like to be a parent. And they were probably right not to take it through. And I think it was probably a blessing in disguise. But at the time, it was exciting and put myself forward. Didn't get on either. But I still watch it. I haven't watched every series, but I've watched this one.
Yeah, and I think it's a 12-week interview process. We obviously see 10 minutes out of 2 days, and it's I'm sure it's really hard. I remember 2011 I went to this personal development event called Play to Win. I don't know if they still run it, but I have to say it's probably the best personal development event I think I went to in that period. I did also go to Tony Robbins UPW, but what I liked about Play to Win, and I really wish we had more of this, and I recommend attending if you can, if it's still going on. A guy called Clinton Swain was running it. But everything was a game of some sort. So all the learning processes were a game. So, for example, we were in a team of 4 at one point, and we had a model Formula One car that we had to disassemble and reassemble. And we all competed against each other. We had maybe 10, 15 minutes to practice, or half an hour to practice, and so on. And you learn certain lessons. Like, for example, in that particular one, I remember learning about just focusing on the bit that's the sticking point in there. So rather than we were practicing over and over again, we were practicing just that one little part. There was another exercise which was about building a business, I think, and you had to, put in your quarterly returns and do all these things. And it was I think that one ran for maybe 2 hours or 3 hours, and it was quite a lot going on with that. Another one where we were in the military, and we had to do something. But what the lesson from that was about compromising values, because there was a way of maybe succeeding but compromising the values you said. Really, really interesting. Another one where we had to give money to someone, I think it was, and then we were left out of the room and went back in. And I think the lesson there was that the person who would given the £5 to or £10 to was not allowed to give it back to us unless we asked for it 5 times in a polite, professional manner. And it was interesting seeing people after someone said no twice.
Yeah.
They're like, give me the money. Yeah. And so there were lessons like that. And I still remember them now 14 years later. And I've often wanted to go back. So, but
I think I've got away with it. I also applied for a reality TV show, which I don't think anyone will ever remember. If you do, put it into the Instagram chat or drop me a message, because I've mentioned this and no one's ever heard of the show. It got 1 series and I don't think it was ever made again. But it was just before I got together with my now wife, Lucy. So hence, again, blessing in disguise, I didn't get on. The show was called Regency House, I think, when you had to live in the Regency times. and it was a dating show, and you went on and you would have met, and you literally had the aristocracy had set the tables, and it was all. I think it got one season. I remember watching the show and telling my wife, who was obviously my girlfriend at the time, I was at her house saying, "God, I auditioned." I got down to the last. I think they selected 8 guys and 8 women. And I think I went down to the last 10 or last 11. It was literally like I was on the reserve list, and I was thinking how lucky I think, because I could not have gone to a dating show. Obviously, having met my wife anyway, it'd have been really wouldn't have worked. But I remember going for that. But what I will say, and funny enough, we're talking about TV shows. I have no interest to be on any right now. However, my son has started with my friend Ben, who I mentioned earlier in the show, was up at the weekend. He mentioned the memory thing and the sleep thing. They conspired to start an application, which I only know because it's popped into my inbox, my Outlook, because they needed the details couldn't do for me. So I think they were trying to surprise me by entering me into the Gladiators.
Oh, yeah.
My son wants me to do it. He's like, "Daddy, I can't answer these questions, so you've got to finish the application." I'm like, "Oh no, I'm not sure I want to be on the Gladiators. I'm not sure. I know what to say." You want to go out in some really cheesy line, haven't you? Go out, "Hey, I'm gonna whatever," and I just like, I don't know.
Maybe. Honestly, I was thinking about that the other day because I'm not in the shape to any way, shape, or form compete. I wonder if there is an age limit. Because I was thinking, I'm now getting to that point where they might be thinking, we're not going to put a 47-year-old guy on with a 22-year-old to get.
Yeah, but you could go with your prime health and fitness, regime, well, and your.
This is the question.
Get you in.
I imagine like a celebrity gladiators one, they'll put whatever age groups on there or whatever. But on the real one, and I thought, how cool would it be for a 47-year-old or 50-year-old to be there making it to the final and things like that. So yeah,
well, I have an email in my inbox. I haven't done anything with it. That is a half-baked application from Ben and my friend Leo.
I was suddenly thinking, because I was thinking, how cool would it have been to have like been on the first series? Because I think I was 16 at the time, so you'd have to have been 18. But be on the first series and then also be on the revamp now.
Yeah, like, going back
30 years later, the same contest.
I couldn't even name you. I haven't been watching it, so I don't know who the current gladiators are. I still remember Wolf and Lightning and all those.
Jet was the one.
Lightning for me. She's used to the backflips and she's to the hang tough. She's really good at hang tough.
She was the blonde one.
Yeah.
I remember Wolf.
Looking back with a really, really bad perm, but back in the 80s, obviously I found that more attractive than I do now. But yeah.
Honestly, watching Gladiators, 2 things got me into health and fitness, I think, when I was I've been into health and fitness since I was probably about 7 or 8 doing judo and other bits and bobs. But when I was around 16, 15, I think for my 16th birthday, I got a set of weights from my sisters as a birthday present. But what got me into using those weights was 2 things. One, on Saturday evenings watching Gladiators, and I'd watch that and then go upstairs for half an hour and work out there, and then watching the Rocky movies. Those 2 things got me working out. I kid you not.
There you are, mate. They're good things to be inspired by. I should say, really, in the context of today's show, Harry, I hear you. I get it. Buddy. I hear you for sure.
That's it. Well, are there any other reality show applications in your
No.
list?
No, definitely not. No. I haven't. Yeah.
I think about maybe whether I should jump onto a Love Island and be one of these. Late editions where they go, hang on a second, what's this grandpa? Because they often
you'd love that. I feel like you go to Love Island every other week with these Estonian mindfulness conferences you go to. They will sound like individual Love Island sex shows.
Yeah, but they're with people a little bit more consciously aware, I think. I can't imagine anything worse than being in a house full of 22-year-olds.
I think you'd struggle. I couldn't do it. I honestly couldn't do it.
See how that would play out in a way, because they think that someone that enters who's 28 is old. I remember there was one contestant when I did watch it years ago. I think I watched one season, came in at 28 and they were all, oh my gosh, she's so old. And I'm thinking, imagine a 48-year-old coming in there. And they'll be
Dude, I reckon you should sign up for the UK edition of Married at First Sight. You're single. They'll take all your isms, all your ways of living. They'll take all that in. They'll find you someone who understands and appreciates.
All right.
Yeah, should do that, mate. I reckon you'd be brilliant on that. I'd definitely tune in for watching your Married at First Sight.
I've never seen an episode, but I always see that the Australian one's on, and I can't bring myself to watch it. I love it.
I'm not going to lie. I have no fear about admitting my passion for and addiction to not just the Australian series, but the English one as well. I did draw the line at the New Zealand series, but the UK and the Australian ones I've been watching, and it goes on for, honestly, it's like 6 months of your life, but it's good late night viewing.
you have time to watch that?
Because that's kind of couple time, right? So it's when you kind of put your laptop down, you chill out, and we watch a couple of episodes of maths, as we call it. As it's known, mate, if you're a fan, you call it maths now. But I reckon you should go for that. Listen, listeners, if you're watching this and you think Harry should apply for Married at First Sight UK series, let's get behind it. Let's let us know.
Yeah, I think what we could do is we'll put an Instagram post up, and you guys can comment on that whether you think yes or no, and then it'll give some traction for Instagram. We need a bit of traction there.
There you go. You for maths, and me for maybe Gladiators. We'll see.
I'd rather be doing the Gladiators than Ninja Warrior one, but I'm not sure my body can take that sort of abuse. I think in my head it feels like it should, but I think realistically not so much. Although I bought some bars the other day for the calisthenics. I think I told you I went last week. And so I bought some things, and I think I almost figured out the is it called not the lever, but where you rest on your elbows and you bend over forwards. I'm not sure what that one's called, but there's something that clicked the other day, and I thought, it's actually like an inch further back that I need to be, and suddenly it was starting to work. And it was
latest gadget
made a massive difference.
Gadget I'm enjoying at the minute. It was about 15 quid on Amazon, and it's just like a virtual skipping rope. So it counts it, and you still skip. Well, obviously, there's no actual rope there. There does come with a rope. You don't need to use it, but it counts how many skips you would do. So you don't need to have the space for a full skipping rope. So I can use it in the gym, and it's really handy. So I'm using that. Do about 500 skips or 750 skips a day in sets of three 250s.
That's amazing.
It takes a couple of minutes, but it counts them, keeps a little counter going, and it's like 15 quid. So I'd recommend that.
Something called a flow rope before?
Like
a really weighted rope, a really heavy rope that you use to kind of.
I think I've seen them. They're similar to like mobile battle ropes, aren't they? I think that kind of thing.
I'm not sure what battle rope. This I think is good for mental health as well, because you have to really fully be present and focus on.
Might be slightly different, or maybe we'll talk about some of these things at a future show.
Gadgets. One I tried the other day at the Idle Home Show that I think I may well buy for my mum as a little present. In fact, I should have bought it for yesterday for Mother's Day. But was a foot reflexology device, and I've got so many of these foot things. But I had to go on it for 15 minutes, and I found it was really simple and easy, because with some of the other devices, it's a bit of a faff to put on, or I have to take your socks off to use the little electrocuting thing. But this one, you just slip in, and she's got foot issues. I think hammer toe, Morton's neuroma, a bunch of different things that affect her sometimes. And she's massaging it daily, which helps alleviate. And I thought, actually, I wonder if this works. I might buy it and see what how she gets on with it for a month. But honestly, I really enjoyed it. And my feet, after 15, 20 minutes of that, when I started walking, did feel somewhat similar to when I do have an hour reflexology with an actual person.
Nice. Well, send me the link. I'll have a look at that. Might be useful for more. Yeah, okay. Cool.
Yeah, I'll send you the link to the one I tried, but I'm sure there's way cheaper ones on Amazon because it was too expensive. And I've gone to these things before, and I've seen it for hundreds of pounds, and then you get the same one for 50 quid or something like that. So.
Well, I'm conscious of your time, and I'm going to let you go, my friend. I think we've had a good old chit chat. The idea that we're living in the feeling of our thinking, not the feeling of the world. We've talked about listening. We've talked about maths. We've talked about communication and the different styles of listening, elephants and hippos and more. So hopefully there's a few things for our listeners to take away. But I'm going to have to shoot. Parental duties call. And I look forward to catching up, mate, in a week or so. And actually, next time I catch up, I can give you an update on the ECG and also on the cold plunging. So I've got some updates to bring up speed.
Oh, yes. We'll do that next time.
Save that space.
Listeners. Perfect. All right. Take care, buddy.
Take care, man.